My name is Annalise Davenport. I'm 31 years old, and I come from a family that builds monuments to permanence. The Davenports have been shaping the skyline of Chicago for 4 generations, our name etched onto the cornerstones of steel and glass towers that pierce the clouds. To be a Davenport was to understand the world in terms of clean lines, structural integrity, and the cold, elegant geometry of modernism. My father, Richard Davenport, was the current patriarch of the firm, a man whose love was as conditional and minimalist as his designs. My mother, Eleanor, was not an architect herself, but an architectural historian whose books were required reading at the top universities. She was the curator of our family's legacy, ensuring its story was told with the proper reverence. Our home in Lincoln Park was a living museum to our own prestige. It was a famous Davenport design, a symphony of glass walls, exposed steel beams, and polished concrete floors. It was beautiful, I suppose, in the way a sculpture is beautiful, meant to be admired from a distance, but cold to the touch. Instead of the cluttered, comfortable warmth I saw in my friends' homes, our walls were hung with framed blueprints of our most famous buildings and abstract art that complemented the stark decor. Dinner conversations were not about our days, but about cantilevered balconies, zoning regulations, and the failings of postmodernism. My sister, Margot, 2 years my senior, was the perfect embodiment of the Davenport aesthetic. She was born with our father's sharp intellect and our mother's cool, statuesque grace. She moved through the world with an effortless precision, her mind a perfect grid of calculations and angles. While I struggled to understand the physics of load-bearing walls, Margot was sketching designs that were both innovative and structurally flawless. She was the golden child, the seamless continuation of our dynasty. Annalise, why can't you see the beauty in the structure, the way your sister does? This question, in its various forms, was the quiet, persistent hum beneath the surface of my childhood. Every school project, every family gathering, became a tableau illustrating my inadequacy. I wasn't a failure in the traditional sense. I earned good grades. But I was not Margot. I tried. I spent long, sterile afternoons in my father's office, tracing blueprints until my fingers were smudged with graphite. I read my mother's dense textbooks on Bauhaus and Mies van der Rohe. But where Margot saw elegant solutions, I saw sterile environments. I saw buildings that forgot about the people who had to live and work inside them. My own passion, when it finally bloomed, felt like a betrayal. Around the age of 12, I discovered the unruly, chaotic, and beautiful world of plants. I started a small vegetable patch in the one corner of our landscaped yard my mother's gardener had neglected. I learned about soil composition, companion planting, and the secret life of roots. I found a profound satisfaction in nurturing life from a tiny seed, in the organic, unpredictable way a vine would curl or a flower would open. To me, this was the real architecture, the architecture of life itself. My little garden was my secret sanctuary until my mother discovered it one afternoon. "What is all this? Digging?" she asked, her voice laced with a confusion that bordered on disgust. "Davenports build things that last for centuries, Annalise. We don't play in the dirt." My father was even more dismissive. At dinner that night, he peered at my soil-stained fingernails over the rim of his glasses. "This horticultural hobby of yours is a distraction. The Illinois Institute of Technology requires a portfolio of serious work, not sketches of petunias." I tried to explain the principles I was learning, about symbiotic ecosystems, about how green spaces could reduce a building's carbon footprint and improve the mental health of its inhabitants. But my words were met with blank stares. "Save the pastoral poetry for the English department, Annalise," my mother said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "It has no place in a serious architectural discussion." My appearance became another point of contention. Margot was sleek and polished, her straight, dark hair and angular features a perfect reflection of our family's brand. I was softer, rounder, with wavy, untamable hair and a tendency to prefer comfortable, earthy fabrics over the structured designer pieces my mother favored. "Stand up straight, Annalise," she would command, her fingers pressing into my shoulders. A Davenport commands a room, they don't shrink into the background. These critiques were often delivered just before we left for a gallery opening or a firm event, ensuring a fresh layer of self-consciousness settled over me for the evening. High school only widened the chasm between us. Margot graduated as valedictorian and went on to the prestigious architecture program at IIT, her path as straight and clear as a steel I-beam. I, meanwhile, excelled in biology and environmental science, but found the required advanced physics and calculus courses to be a joyless struggle. The family narrative was set in stone. Margot was the brilliant successor, and I was the gentle, slightly dim disappointment, the one who just couldn't grasp the legacy she was born into. At family functions, relatives would praise Margot's latest award-winning designs. Then they would turn to me, their smiles tinged with a well-meaning pity. "And Annalise," they'd say, "still enjoying your gardening?" By my senior year, my secret life had blossomed. I had secretly applied not to architecture schools, but to the top landscape architecture and environmental design programs in the country. My grades were strong enough across the board, but my passion for the living world had become the central root system of my life. I had volunteered at the Chicago Botanic Garden, and my personal project, a detailed proposal for a network of green roofs across the loop, had won a regional science award. I kept this triumph to myself, knowing it would be dismissed as a quaint hobby. My high school graduation should have been a moment of quiet pride. Instead, it was the preamble to my exile. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, graduating with honors, I scanned the audience. I saw my mother making a quiet note in a small leather-bound book and my father checking messages on his phone. When my name was called, neither of them looked up. That evening, my parents hosted a dinner at our home. On the surface, it was to celebrate my graduation. In reality, it was a carefully orchestrated event to reaffirm the Davenport legacy in front of our extended family and my father's most influential colleagues. My grandmother, a formidable woman who had been one of the first female partners at the original firm, was there. The air chimed with the clinking of expensive crystal and hummed with conversations about urban planning and structural engineering. My father stood at the head of the long, minimalist dining table, raising his glass. A toast, he announced, his voice resonating with patriarchal authority. To Annalise, who graduates today and will soon begin her journey to becoming the next great Davenport architect, starting with the pre-collegiate program at IIT this summer. A cold knot formed in my stomach. They hadn't asked. They had simply decided, paving my future with the same cold concrete they used in their foundations. The acceptance letter from the University of Illinois' renowned College of Fine and Applied Arts, offering me a place in their landscape architecture program with a significant scholarship, felt like a warm, living thing in my clutch. This was it. This was the moment to plant my own flag. "Actually," I said, my voice clearer and steadier than I expected, "I've decided to study landscape architecture at the University of Illinois. I've been accepted with a chancellor's scholarship." The silence that fell over the room was absolute, as heavy and profound as a winter snow. My mother's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. My father's practiced smile tightened, calcifying into a hard, unfamiliar line. Margot, home from university for the occasion, took a slow, deliberate sip of water, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "That's a peculiar joke, Annalise," my mother said finally, her voice thin and taut. "Perhaps not the best-timed one." "It's not a joke," I replied, my courage solidifying. I opened my clutch and placed the acceptance letter on the table beside my plate. "I've been passionate about this for years. This is what I want to do." My father's face, usually a mask of calm control, began to flush a deep, dangerous red. "Put that away," he commanded, his voice a low hiss. "We will discuss this aberration in private." But my mother had already snatched the letter. Her eyes, sharp and analytical, scanned the page with growing horror. This is unacceptable," she stammered, the paper trembling in her hand. "No Davenport has ever been a gardener. We design the vessels of civilization. We don't merely decorate the grounds around them." "It's not just decorating, Mother. It's about creating sustainable ecosystems, about integrating the natural world into urban." "Enough." My father's hand came down flat on the table, the sharp sound making the silverware jump. You have embarrassed this family enough for one night. My great-aunt, another architect, leaned towards my grandmother and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. She always was a bit soft. Not the same sharp mind, you know. Not Davenport material. My cousin, already an intern at my father's firm, gave me a look of profound pity. Well, I suppose rigorous design isn't for everyone. Some people are more suited to softer pursuits. The rest of the dinner was an agonizing performance. My parents maintained a veneer of icy civility until the last guest had departed, but I could feel the pressure building, the storm gathering just behind their eyes. The moment the front door clicked shut, my mother turned on me. "How could you?" she hissed, her composure finally cracking. "How could you stand there and announce that you'd rather play in the mud than carry on a 4-generation legacy? Do you have any idea what people will think? I'm not going to be playing in the mud. Landscape architecture is a complex and important. I don't care what it is," she shouted, her voice echoing in the cavernous, high-ceilinged room. "No daughter of mine will throw her life away on something so decorative, so utterly inconsequential." My father, ever the pragmatist, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Annalise, let me be perfectly clear. The Davenport name has funded generations of architectural education at the finest institutions. We will not be funding this horticultural venture. If you persist in this foolishness, you will do so entirely on your own." "Fine," I said, the words choked by rising tears. "I have a scholarship. I'll get a job for the rest." "It's more than the money," my mother cut in, her voice dripping with ice. "It is our name, our reputation. If you choose this path, you choose to walk it as someone other than a Davenport." Margot, who had been observing the entire scene with a kind of detached, clinical interest, finally spoke. Her words were quiet, but they cut the deepest. "You were always the wildflower in a minimalist garden, Annalise. Too messy, too sentimental. Not quite strong enough for the clean lines of our world. Maybe arranging flower beds is more your speed." Her casual cruelty was the final fracture in my already breaking heart. Margot and I had been allies once, as children, before the weight of our parents' expectations had pressed down and separated us. Her words showed me how completely she had accepted their cold creed. "Family meeting. My study. Tomorrow morning," my father announced, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We will finalize this then. I suggest you use the night to reconsider your position, Annalise." I barely slept. By morning, a small duffel bag was packed and hidden in my closet. I knew my parents. I knew their pride, their unbending adherence to their own rigid principles. Yet a small, childish part of me held onto a sliver of hope that they might listen, that they might try to understand. The family meeting was held in my father's study, a room that was the very heart of the Davenport ethos. Walls of dark wood, shelves filled with architectural tomes, a massive desk of steel and glass. My parents sat behind it like judges, with Margot perched on the edge of a leather chair, an impassive observer. I stood before them, a defendant at her own sentencing. "We have discussed the situation," my father began, his tone final. "And we have reached a decision. You will rescind your acceptance to this state university and enroll at IIT. Or you are no longer welcome in this house or in this family." The cold finality of it stole my breath. "You're disowning me? Over my choice of major?" "Don't be so dramatic," my mother said, her tone utterly detached. "We are offering you a choice. The correct one should be obvious to anyone with your advantages." I looked at their faces, hard and unyielding as granite. "I want to follow my own path," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why is that so unacceptable?" My mother's laugh was a short, brittle sound. "Your own path? Annalise, look at yourself. You are a sweet girl, but you are not exceptional. You are not a visionary. The Davenport name, the legacy we are offering you, is the most extraordinary thing about you. Without it, what do you imagine you will become?" Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall around my heart. I had always known I was the lesser child, but the raw contempt in her voice laid the truth bare. To them, I had no intrinsic value beyond my potential to be a lesser version of them. "I'd rather be an ordinary, happy person than be miserable living a life that isn't mine," I managed to say. My father opened a drawer in his great desk and took out a sheaf of papers. Then you leave us no choice. I have already instructed my attorney to amend my will. The educational trust established in your name will be dissolved. You have until this evening to collect your personal effects. Even Margot seemed momentarily taken aback by the swift, surgical precision of the act. But she recovered in an instant. Well, she said, offering a small, cruel smile. I suppose that settles that. I always thought the firm should pass to a single heir anyway. It's cleaner. I stood there, tears carving silent paths down my cheeks as my father signed the documents with a sleek, silver fountain pen, the same one he used to sketch his monolithic designs. With the same cool, clinical detachment, he was sketching me out of their lives. Don't call yourself a Davenport anymore, my mother said, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. You've rejected everything the name stands for. I walked out of the study in a daze. Upstairs, as I packed what little I could carry clothes, a few precious books on botany, my laptop, Margot appeared in the doorway. You could just give in, you know, she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. Tell them you've changed your mind. They'd take you back. Eventually. I looked at my sister, so beautiful, so accomplished, and so utterly hollowed out by our family's ambition. Would you want me to live your life if you hated every second of it? She shrugged. It's better than being a nobody. That afternoon, I left the only home I had ever known with $300 from my savings account, a duffel bag, and a shattered heart. As the taxi pulled away from the stark glass house in Lincoln Park, I didn't know if I would ever see my family again. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would either flourish on my own terms, or I would wither trying. Either way, I would never again allow someone else to decide if I deserved to grow in the sun. The first months after being cast out were a disorienting blur of fear and fatigue. My generous scholarship covered tuition, but not the cost of living. The dream of attending university, which had felt like an act of rebellion, now seemed like an insurmountable mountain. I called my one true friend, Mia, a painter whose parents had always shown me a warmth that felt exotic and life-giving. My couch is your couch, she said, no hesitation in her voice. Her tiny, paint-splattered apartment in Wicker Park, filled with vibrant canvases and overflowing bookshelves, became my sanctuary. For 4 months, her lumpy sofa was my bed. Finding work was a humbling education. Without a degree, my resume was thin. I pieced together a patchwork of jobs. I woke before dawn to arrange bouquets at a florist, spent my afternoons potting plants at a local garden center, and worked weekends as a waitress. In the slivers of time between shifts, I would collapse onto Mia's couch, too bone-tired to even properly mourn the life I had lost. You're going to burn out, Annalise, Mia would say, watching me meticulously budget my meager earnings. I just need enough to get a room near campus, I'd explain. Once I'm there, I can make it work. By the fall, I had saved just enough for the first month's rent on a tiny room in a shared house in Urbana, miles away from the cold grandeur of Chicago. The room was barely big enough for a bed and a desk, with a window that looked out onto a brick wall, but it was mine. The bus ride to the university's sprawling campus became my study hall. That first semester was a grueling test of endurance. I took a full course load while working 20 hours a week at the university's arboretum. I lived on cheap pasta and a fierce, quiet determination. When my classmates complained about their workloads or their parents' expectations, I stayed silent. They couldn't possibly understand the terror and the strange freedom of having no safety net at all. It was in my ecological design course that I met Professor Colin Wright. He was a legend in the field of landscape architecture, a man who had retired from a celebrated career to teach. After I submitted a paper proposing a radical integration of native wetlands into a new suburban development plan, he asked me to stay after class. This is a very mature perspective, he said, tapping my paper with his pen. Most students are focused on aesthetics. You're designing a functioning ecosystem that also happens to be beautiful. You're thinking about the water table, the native pollinators, the long-term resilience. I explained my background in broad strokes, omitting the family name that now felt like a phantom limb. I believe the spaces we build should heal the land, not just occupy it, I said. Professor Colin Wright became my mentor. He saw the value in my perspective, the very thing my family had dismissed as soft. He understood that I wasn't just arranging flowers, I was choreographing a dance between the human world and the natural one. The greatest innovations, he told me, come from those who can bridge disciplines. An architect who understands botany, a botanist who understands structure, that's where the magic is. By my final year, I had developed the core concept for my future. My senior thesis was an ambitious project, a design philosophy I called verdant architecture. It was a system for retrofitting existing urban buildings with living walls, integrated water capture systems, and rooftop gardens that would not only beautify the city, but also reduce energy consumption, improve air quality, and provide measurable mental health benefits to the inhabitants. The idea was born directly from the sterile, glass and steel world I had fled. Ironically, the family that had disowned me had provided the perfect inspiration for my life's work. I graduated summa cum laude. The night of the ceremony, I sat alone in my small rented room, surrounded by my thesis blueprints and textbooks. There was no celebratory dinner, no proud family. I allowed myself a single hour to feel the sting of that absence before I turned back to my plans for the future. Professor Colin Wright, using his own reputation as collateral, helped me secure a small business loan. I've backed dozens of young designers, he said, signing the papers. None have had your combination of vision and grit. The early days of my company, which I named Verdant Spaces, were relentlessly difficult. I operated out of a corner of a shared makerspace in Chicago, sleeping on a futon in the back to save on rent. My first pitches to developers and architectural firms were met with polite condescension. It's a lovely idea, but our clients are interested in square footage, not soil composition, one developer told me. Our firm handles the real architecture. We can recommend a good landscaping company for the shrubbery, said a partner at a firm that had often competed with my father's. Each rejection was a familiar sting, but this time it didn't crush me. It fueled me. I refined my proposals, gathering hard data. I recruited a brilliant horticulturalist and a savvy engineer, offering them equity in a company that was, at the time, little more than a dream. We started small, taking on projects no one else wanted, a single living wall in a coffee shop, a rooftop garden for a small nonprofit, a community vegetable patch in a low-income neighborhood. Slowly, we built a portfolio and, more importantly, a collection of case studies. We proved that our designs could lower a building's summer cooling costs by 15%, that office workers with a view of our green walls reported a 20% reduction in stress. Our breakthrough came 2 years into the struggle. A progressive tech company, building a new campus in the West Loop, was looking for a design that reflected their forward-thinking brand. They took a chance on us. We transformed their sterile, modern building into a living, breathing ecosystem. A 4-story atrium became a vertical rainforest. The roof became a sprawling park with walking trails and beehives. The project won a major national design award, and suddenly, the phones started ringing. Throughout this period, I lived with a frugality born of deep-seated fear. Even as Verdant Spaces began to gain a national reputation, I kept my small apartment, drove a 10-year-old car, and worked with the same desperate intensity. The scars of my early independence ran deep. Mia remained my anchor. "When are you going to let yourself enjoy this?" she asked me one evening, after we'd landed a major contract to redesign the public plazas for the entire city. "You proved them wrong a long time ago." But it was no longer about proving them wrong. Somewhere in the quiet hours spent sketching root systems and calculating water loads, my motivation had shifted. The anger had composted into passion. I genuinely believed in the work we were doing, creating healthier, more humane cities. With success came the resources to finally address the trauma I had been carrying. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Patel, who helped me untangle the complex grief of my family's rejection. "Your professional success is a testament to your resilience," she told me. "But it won't, by itself, heal the wound of feeling unworthy. That is a different kind of work." She was right. Despite running a company now valued in the tens of millions, despite the accolades and financial security, I would sometimes wake from dreams of my mother's disappointed gaze or my father's cold, dismissive signature. External success couldn't mend the internal fracture, but it gave me the tools and the space to begin the kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making it more beautiful for having been broken. 9 years after I walked out of that cold glass house, I had transformed from a terrified, penniless student into the CEO of a pioneering design firm. I had proven I could thrive not just without the Davenport name, but by creating a new one. What I had not yet confronted was whether I could ever truly feel whole while carrying the weight of their rejection. That final piece of the architecture of my own life was yet to be built. 5 years after I founded Verdant Spaces, the firm had become a force in the world of architecture and urban design. Our philosophy of verdant architecture was no longer a fringe concept. It was being taught in universities and adopted by cities across the country. We had contracts to retrofit government buildings in Washington, D.C. and design new, sustainable communities in California. The name Annalise Davenport, once erased by her own family, was now synonymous with the future of green design. After our firm was awarded the prestigious National Design Award from the Cooper Hewitt Museum, our valuation soared. I remained the majority owner, but I had made sure that Professor Colin Wright and my earliest employees were significant shareholders. The business press began to take notice. Forbes featured me in their 40 Under 40 issue, and Architectural Digest ran a 10-page spread on our West Loop Tech Campus project. The irony was a constant, quiet companion. Cast out for choosing plants over plans, I was now influencing the built environment on a scale my father, with his singular towers, could only dream of. Our designs had been proven to reduce urban heat island effects, cut municipal water usage, and create public spaces that fostered genuine community. With success came a personal transformation that had nothing to do with my family's standards. No longer fueled by stress and cheap pasta, I had the time and resources to care for myself. I found a love for yoga, which taught me about a different kind of structural integrity, the one within my own body. The exhausted, uncertain girl had been replaced by a woman who moved with a quiet, centered confidence. I curated a wardrobe of beautifully made clothes in natural fabrics that felt good against my skin, a stark contrast to the severe, architectural pieces my mother favored. These were not choices made to win approval, but to express the person I had become. "You're glowing, Annalise," Mia said one afternoon as we had tea in a park I had designed. "And it's not just the success. It's like you've finally settled into your own skin." She was right. Free from the constant, crushing comparison to Margot, I had discovered my own strengths, a quiet but unyielding vision, an empathetic leadership style, and a deep-seated resilience. As my public profile grew, questions about my background became unavoidable. "Your understanding of architectural form is so innate for someone trained in landscape," an interviewer for a podcast once commented. Where does that come from? I had developed a careful, truthful but incomplete answer. I grew up in a family deeply immersed in the world of architecture, I would say. I was surrounded by discussions of form and function from a young age. I just believed that function should include the well-being of the planet and the people. It was an answer that honored my past without being defined by it. I had no desire to use the Davenport name I had been told to discard, nor did I want to publicly air the painful story of my rejection. My work, my new name, would stand on its own. Occasionally, a former family acquaintance or a distant cousin would send a tentative email. "Your parents must be so incredibly proud," one read, after the Forbes article was published. I never replied. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be either a lie or a cruelty. My personal life, long sacrificed on the altar of survival and ambition, began to blossom. I developed a close circle of friends, fellow entrepreneurs and artists who understood the solitary pressures of building a life from scratch. I started volunteering, mentoring young design students from underprivileged backgrounds, seeing my own early struggles reflected in their determination. And then I met Leo. He was a history teacher at a public high school in Pilsen, where we were working on a pro bono project to turn a derelict lot into a community garden and outdoor classroom. While developers and city officials often met our team with skepticism, Leo met us with an eager, collaborative spirit. "This will give my students a chance to learn with their hands," he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "To see history not just in books, but in the soil beneath their feet." Our conversations about soil pH and historical land use soon turned into long walks along the lakefront, then dinners, then weekends spent exploring the city's hidden green spaces. Leo's passion was for people, for community, for stories. He was warm and grounded in a way that felt like coming home. With him, I felt safe enough to share the full story of the Davenports, the cold glass house, and the daughter who was thrown away. "They didn't throw away a daughter," he said simply, taking my hand after I had finished. "They threw away a mirror. And they didn't like the reflection because it showed them what they were missing." His simple, profound acceptance helped heal cracks in my foundation I didn't even know were still there. With Leo, I began to imagine a future that included a true partnership, perhaps even a family of our own, one built not on legacy and expectation, but on warmth and unconditional love. Still, a shadow lingered. "You still flinch when you talk about real happiness," Dr. Patel observed in one of our sessions. "As if you're waiting for it to be taken away. A part of you is still that girl standing in her father's study, being told she is worthless." She was right. The external validation was there, but the internal verdict was still being decided by a jury of ghosts. The opportunity to face those ghosts arrived unexpectedly. I was flipping through a design magazine at a client's office when a familiar face stopped me cold. It was Margot. An article announced her engagement to Nicholas Hayes, a rising star at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, one of the most powerful architecture firms in the world. The wedding was to be held at the Art Institute of Chicago in 2 months. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Nicholas Hayes. I knew the name. He was the lead architect on the new Lakeshore Biomedical Campus, a massive project adjacent to a public park we were designing. Our teams had been in contact for months, coordinating sight lines and access points, but we had never met in person. "Are you going to go?" Leo asked gently when I showed him the magazine that evening. The thought made me feel physically ill. I wouldn't be invited. "Maybe not," he said, his expression full of understanding. "But do you need to go?" "For you?" "To finally stand in the same room with them, not as the girl they threw out, but as the woman you are now." After a long session with Dr. Patel, I made a decision. I wouldn't ask for an invitation. I would simply go. Not to cause a scene, not for revenge, but to stand as a quiet witness to my own survival. After 9 years of exile, I would return to the world of the Davenports, not seeking entry, but to finally close the door on my own terms. "Just remember," Leo said, as I chose a simple but exquisitely tailored deep green dress for the occasion. "You're not going there for their approval. You outgrew the need for that years ago. You're going there for you." As the wedding date neared, I prepared myself as if for a major project presentation. I wasn't the heartbroken girl they had banished. I was Annalise Davenport, founder of a firm that was reshaping the very profession they revered. Whatever happened at the Art Institute, I would be meeting my family not as their inferior, but as someone who had built a world they couldn't even conceive of, a world that was, in its own quiet way, far more enduring than their monuments of steel and glass.